Well, it's been a quiet week in Washington, D.C., our nation's capital. Actually, forget that. I've just been feeling a little bad about stealing the show last week to talk about my concerns, leaving Sherry Finn on her own in the middle of... Sherry received some bad news last week. Just as she felt a little relief after losing her business and her house, after spending one miserable week after another shuttling from hotels to motels to anything that just had tells in the name. Just as Sherry believed there might be hope, some hope of finding work, getting back on her feet, Sherry learned about Uno Nomad's maximum stay policy. She was standing in the kitchen that morning as the hour reached towards noon, hoping to get a bite of one of those biscuits Greta made. She'd heard so much about the biscuits, and to be honest, Sherry hadn't eaten in 2 days. She thought she'd eaten the day before, but Sherry didn't eat any biscuits. A young mother asked her what her plans were after Una Nomad, and Sherry said she hoped she wouldn't have to make plans for some time. And then another woman chimed in with a whole lot of details Sherry never wanted to hear about the maximum stay policy. And then another woman did the math of just how long Sherry and Sean had left there at Uno Nomad. And then another woman said, "I guess you should start making plans then." And Sherry, well, she kind of lost it. "Make plans?" she barked back at a room full of women, none of whom were her enemy, but that didn't really matter when she had just 2 weeks before she and her nephew would be out in the street. Sherry continued, "I had plans. I had a lifetime of plans. I was supposed to travel. I was supposed to go cross-country. I wasn't going to fly across. I wasn't going to take a train. I was going to find the right guy, and we would drive it 1 mile at a time, stopping wherever we wanted to stop, doing whatever we wanted to do." And then my mom died. And then my sister. And nobody was left to take over the bar. I didn't know what to do. But I thought I was doing a pretty good job. Sherry had more to say. Sherry could speak volumes. She wanted to, but her chest seized up and her throat closed tight. And Greta reached up with one flower-kissed hand, and she took Sherry's in her own, as some of the other women in the room expressed their sincere sympathy for a tale that was actually pretty familiar. Then, of course, there were the other women. One of them said to Sherry that she had lots of breaks when she probably didn't deserve any, so she really had no right to complain. But Sherry didn't hear that. Another woman told Sherry that they all had to fight for what they had, and that was the truth. But Sherry didn't want to hear that. Because there was another woman telling Sherry that she had to have hope. Because hope was the only thing that could save her. And Sherry heard that. "Hope?" she asked. How can I have hope? Hope for what? For what? And Greta pulled her close and held her softly, like she was another one of Greta's biscuits. I suppose, in a way, she was. Greta said, "Hope is so much to ask, girl. I know. Believe me, I know. But when hope is hardest to find, it's important to remember that hope doesn't need a reason. Hope doesn't need a what for. And right now, at this moment, and in this place, in this country, at this time, I can understand why hope feels so distant and impossible to reach. It's hard to be hopeful," she said. "Because hope is just about the greatest thing there is." Hope might as well have been a winning lottery ticket as far as Sherry was concerned. Sherry thanked Greta, though she spent the rest of the afternoon wondering if she had, and darted out of the kitchen and onto the sidewalk beneath an old tree spreading its shade out in front of Uno Nomad. She didn't know where she was going to go. She had applied to so many jobs, she had stopped trying to keep track. At that moment, she held 3 jobs. But in all, that equaled about 30 hours, with far less pay than she would ever need to pay rent on an apartment or even for a motel room. She cleaned restaurants on weekend nights as people slept. She helped with the books at a bar not too far from where Freedom Fried had been. And in between all of that, she worked whatever gigs she could find online. Last week, she had been a secret shopper. Scrounging for whatever she could find was embarrassing, but she couldn't get the kind of jobs that paid money because her credit rating had been destroyed. And she didn't have a permanent address. And she still hadn't figured out a way of telling her story in an interview that didn't sound sad. Sherry walked the streets of Deanwood, an old suburb Sherry couldn't say she was very familiar, her mind deep inside the convoluted layers of her dilemma. Then, all of a sudden, Sherry realized how close she was to the National Arboretum, except for the river in her path with no way to cross. Except for that. Instead, she walked the empty open path through Kenilworth Park. Nothing but empty grass to cause her problems. But when you're in a mood like that, sometimes what you really need is empty space. Until she saw a series of tents. She wondered if it was a circus or a fair. Well, it was, of a sort. The tents actually held a homeless fair, sponsored by a charity Sherry could neither pronounce nor remember. But she had to admit the tents were full of people just like her, and more. Much more. And Sherry convinced herself to walk as far as the tent's entrance so she could look inside and see what might be in there. In there, she saw even more people like herself. A pressing, murmuring mass of human beings who all had one thing in common: a lack of housing. Sherry reminded herself to beat herself up sometime later for not doing more to help others when she could. But back in the bar, Sherry had always felt like the one who needed help. And before the bar, Sherry couldn't remember that far back with any accuracy. She seemed to remember a spoiled kid who got what she wanted. Not all the time, but enough. "This isn't the entrance," a young man in a dark sport coat said. Sherry, lost in thought, realized he was talking to her. "I wasn't looking to come inside," she told no one in particular as she skulked away. But she was looking to go inside, and she knew it. She just hadn't known it until that moment. Sherry walked around the tent to the long line leading out from the tent. A line made up of families and elderly parents, all alone. Of brown people and black people and even white people. Of Democrats and Republicans, atheists and Catholics. Sherry thought she'd count all of the people in line, but gave up after she hit 50. Anything over 50 just felt too sad for her. She got into the line and stood in silence. She stood in silence, but also mostly in shame. Anyone in her shoes would have felt her shame. Anyone who didn't would have been heartless, and also up for a sweet cabinet position in the Trump White House. She didn't see the inside of the tent until after 4. Someone asked her what she was looking for, and Sherry told them a job. They asked her if she wanted clothes or help with food, and Sherry answered, "I'm just looking for a job. Do you have any booth for employment opportunities?" She looked across a white table covered in paper and 2 young Asian men and a black girl all offering shoes and makeup and blood screenings, and Sherry shouted at them, "I just want a job! Is that too much to ask?" Actually, you'll have to forgive me. I'm lying about that part. Sherry shouted a lot more than that, and for some time. And when the black girl pulled her aside, Sherry wasn't finished shouting. And when the black girl sat down and took her hand, Sherry wasn't finished. And when Sherry was reduced to crying, and the black girl held her and got her a bottle of water, Sherry wasn't finished. She learned that the girl's name was Arcadia, and that she was homeless too. She had been a student at Howard University. Her parents were quite wealthy. "It's not homelessness," she said to Sherry. "It's hopelessness." Sherry walked out of the tent sometime later, before the sun had started its fall, with a new pair of shoes, a new haircut, vouchers for food, 2 new toothbrushes, toothpaste, and floss. But she hadn't found a job. and she hadn't found a home. To be honest, Sherry couldn't say she had found hope. She wasn't even sure if she knew what hope was anymore. Until next time, be good to yourself, be kind to others, and let's make this world a better place. This is Ken LaSalle, and I just wanted to thank you for stopping by for this episode of DC Home. For more information about myself and the work I do, I invite you to take a look at my website at kenlasalle.com. You can also find my work on Amazon, Audible, iTunes, and anywhere you find books and audiobooks available online. And look for the first DC Home compilation coming soon. You can also find me on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube by searching my name, Ken LaSalle. And thank you, as always, for your support.